Well, let's take that conversation forward now, and we speak to University of Johannesburg's Christian Studies and Africa, or in Africa, professor. That's Maria Frahm-Arp. Professor, good evening to you, and thank you very much for your time. Let's start with the establishment of this committee that is going to examine the behavior of some of these religious leaders. Do you believe that it is the right step, but also importantly, might it uncover something that we may not already know in the religious space, given what's been happening?
Good evening, and thank you so much for delving into this topic, which I think is so important. I think that a commission exploring the different churches in particular that we have is a good idea because, as the chairperson said, we don't even know all the churches that exist. And it is, well, the way the country is set up at the moment, you are meant to register if you have a church, who the leadership is. Following the investigation that the Commission did in 2018, 2019, all churches must disclose their income. They should be taxed on any income. So already there are a lot of things in place. But sadly, there are many churches that are operating that don't follow these procedures.
So let's talk about why it is that there is exactly the latter part of your statement, that there's so many churches in South Africa. The fact that someone can just wake up tomorrow and start a church without registering who they are, as one of the persons was saying in that insert. We don't know who these people are, where do they come from, what kind of training have they had. Where do we begin? Where does this committee begin to even try and find out where these religious practices are happening?
Yeah, so this is very tricky. Of course, the commission can find out who exists and what churches are out there. And we can create a register and have responsible people. But then we come to the question of education. So if we look at some types of Pentecostal churches in Africa, and we look at the very beginnings of the Pentecostal movement in the early 1900s, these churches began because people were filled with the Spirit, and they were Spirit-led to begin churches. They had no type of education, either theological or in any other sense. And many of these churches have become remarkably successful, play a very important role in society. Over time, many of these leaders have gone on to go to Bible colleges and often to get degrees at universities. But to regulate and say that everybody who leads a church must have a certain level of education will be problematic. We also have a particular history in South Africa, and not everybody has had equal access to education. Yeah. And on the level of education alone, you can't judge whether somebody is a good priest. Well, then the next thing is, well, could we look at what the followers say? Yeah. And again, as the chairperson said, many of the followers whose families see that they are being abused themselves don't feel abused. Yeah. And if you've been following the Pastor Omatosi case, you'll see on social media that there are many followers who are adamant that he hasn't raped anybody, because when he's had sexual intercourse with anyone, those people should be grateful because he's blessed them. So in the worldview of these churches, these pastors are not doing anything wrong.
How then do you involve law enforcement in the scenario that you've just painted, where a claim comes forward that this person was raped, but the victim themselves do not see what happened to them as an act of rape? If anything, as you put it, the leader, the church leader, was simply blessing them. Is this going to be a difficult task, you think?
I think it's going to be an enormously difficult task. So everybody needs to adhere to the laws of the country. But for us to enforce those laws, and we have very strict laws around what we consider rape, what we consider abuse, sexual abuse, financial abuse, emotional abuse, what we consider bullying. We have actually got all these instruments in place. The problem comes in how do we use these instruments? When the victims themselves don't see that they are being abused. I saw that you had a clip from Rabboni Church where the pastor told people to eat grass.
Yeah.
This particular church has now become a huge international online church with hundreds and thousands of followers all around the world.
What happens in that instance where a person, we know that previously one of the, or let me say, the churchgoers, you could see them on video drinking petrol, and some were being fed snakes. What happens if they suffer an adverse health event and they die? Surely that cannot not be prosecuted. Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong. And many of those churches, because we had a whole spate of them from about 2013 to around 2018, where there were a number of these different incidences in varying churches. And there was a very detailed investigation that took place. And many of these church pastors were brought before judges, and churches were closed down, and people were prosecuted for killing church members. But, that's a very extreme case. And we don't want people to be killed because of what their pastors have said they should do or drink or believe. Now, many of these churches that were investigated have also subsequently changed their behavior. So Rabboni, for example, doesn't tell people to drink petrol or eat grass anymore. But we have had a whole spate of different churches over the last 15 years, encouraging people to do all sorts of strange things.
Yeah.
But throughout Africa at the moment, we have this phenomenon of pastors blessing particularly women, but not always women, through sexual intercourse. And so the line becomes very blurred. Is this rape? And as we saw in the case of Cheryl Zondi, she only realized afterwards that she had been raped because she'd actually been so brainwashed. And she was a minor when the pastor abused her.
Ultimately, Professor, I want to think that society is going to have to be educated about what amounts to abuse and when it is that you can report such if you feel that this went beyond what you expected of a church leader. There is also the element of financial benefit for these pastors because some of them do live very lavish lives versus the congregants because people believe that you have to give in order to have plenty. Is that a space that you think also has got to be interrogated? Where do these financial benefits come from? And as you alluded to earlier, should churches start paying taxes?
So this is very tricky. We live in a country where it is legal to gamble. So we live in a country where the state doesn't regulate how you spend your money. So why then should we now say you can spend money on gambling, but it is wrong to give money to a religious organization? Because what the problem is here is how do you define that one church is good and another church isn't? According to what theology are you going to use? Now, varying churches will come forward and tell you why theirs is correct. But what we have tried to do is create a society that is open and where people can express all types of religious behavior. So when a religious leader breaks the law, it is very clear that he has to be taken in front of a judge and found guilty if indeed he did break the law.
Yeah.
So the point you were making about getting society and getting people to bring these pastors before the courts and to accuse them if they have broken the law is very important.
Yeah.
But the other part that is so tricky is when people voluntarily give money, how do we judge and ascertain that that wasn't actually done voluntarily? All the research that I've done and that many of my colleagues have done points over and over again to the fact that the people themselves report that they are giving this money voluntarily.
Yeah.
And so how does one regulate that?
Yeah.
The best we can do, I think, is education. But educate according to what sort of standards? Yes, many churches will say the Bible says give 10% of your earning. So for many churches, giving more may be seen as wrong. But many others will say, but this is a gift I want to give. Why is it wrong to give more?
Yeah. It is a conversation that we hopefully will take forward, Professor, once the findings of this committee that has been established to examine this behavior of some church leaders. For the time being, I want to thank you very much for your time, and we'll probably speak in a year's time, and that's when I think we are going to give or finally have those findings from the committee. Professor Maria Frahm-Arp is the Professor of Christian Studies in Africa. She is attached to the University of Johannesburg.